I'm Eric Stoutenburg. I'm a director of energy storage for Eolian. We develop wind, solar, battery storage projects, clean molecule projects, electric vehicle charging infrastructure across the United States. And back as far as 2018, we initiated a project that we call the Blue Valley Project, interconnecting to the Blue Valley substation that IPL operates. Briefly about Eolian. Like I mentioned, we have a long presence. I actually got my career start working on all those blue dots in Oklahoma and the Texas Panhandle, very large wind farms. From about 2017 onward, I worked on all of our battery storage projects. We have 381 megawatts operating in California and Texas of storage, and a bunch of solar and a bunch of wind. So really a deep presence, in particular in SPP. And that's sort of a lot of the reason I put in a lot of early interconnection positions for storage and SPP, because it was like I think the previous speakers from Springfield mentioned, battery storage was sort of always on the horizon, and now it is on the horizon. And it's certainly going to be this sort of glue that brings together renewables and thermal resources, one of which needs to stay on and operate as constantly as possible, and one that fluctuates with the wind and the weather. And you need some resource that sort of, buffers between those two. And that's really storage. And I'll get into that a little bit further. What do these things look like? So this is actually our smallest project in California. It happens to be in my hometown, a small sort of agricultural community. It's actually at the airport in an industrial business park that's adjacent to the actually emergency operations center for Ventura County. You can see a couple features in here. One is a wall that was built to the city code. The second are these big white boxes, which I'll show another picture of here shortly. That's where the batteries are. And then there are 4 green boxes. Those are the transformers. Those are identical to what you might see, in the back parking lot of a Walmart that's powering a facility. And then the gray box kind of in the back right is the controls and the breaker. And there's a pole that the utility already had installed. It was how they serve this business park in the back right corner. We connect underground and then go up to the wires that are already there. So if we zoom in on this project, once the vegetation came in that we planted, this is what it looks like from the outside. It's candidly kind of a boring installation for those of the outside. You just sort of drive by a vegetated wall and you don't really know what's behind it. And that's sort of the intent is really not to disrupt any view shed. If we go inside of it, this particular project is 11 megawatts and 4 hours duration. And that means that it can dispatch at 11 megawatts for 4 continuous hours when it's on a full charge. Our largest project in Texas is 200 megawatts in 2.5 hours. And all you would really see in a larger project is many, many more rows of these white boxes. Inside the white boxes are the batteries. Like I said, this one is from Tesla, and that's the standard green transformer. That's a bunch of my team that was back there for a site visit, and then the gray standard electrical panels. And really everything from the white box all the way up to the point of interconnection is identical, whether this was nuclear, coal, gas, wind, solar. That's sort of all the typical high voltage equipment. This is a fairly low voltage interconnection, so the transformers get bigger as you get to bigger projects. But pretty standard. And then all the, quote unquote, new technology is really inside the white box. Inside the white box, there's 2 components. One is the inverter, which is fairly standard technology. It underpins all of the solar projects out there that already are operations. And that just converts alternating power that exists on the transmission system to direct current power that goes into the batteries. And then there's the batteries themselves. One keynote, which I can show. So Tesla actually doesn't let you take pictures of inside their batteries, but we have a project in Texas. I can show you what the batteries look like inside, and this is what it does. So if you open up the cabinets, you basically can see, there's 6 rows or 6 columns of 13 battery stacks and then a control module on the top. They kind of look a lot like servers, and the architecture of them is quite similar. There's a fan cooling them off, and then inside there's a bunch of battery cells. One key distinction between stationary energy storage that serves the electric utility industry and electric car batteries are, while they're both lithium ion chemistries, they are different in their chemical makeup for the rest of the battery. So in a car, you need to be as light as possible to get your battery to take you as far as possible. And so that's why they often use nickel, manganese, and cobalt to increase what's known as the energy density. So the amount of energy stored per kilogram of battery weight. Weight doesn't matter when you're stationary. So we actually use lithium iron phosphate batteries. And this is now sort of the industry standard across all utility scale installations, is the use of lithium ion phosphate batteries. There are older installations that have the batteries that are more similar to electric vehicles. And the key reason this is important is the lithium iron phosphate batteries have a better safety profile. That's sort of the trade-off you get when you're trying to get to a car and have this thing be very light. You're necessarily having, a lower ignition point. You have more chance of what's known as thermal runaway, where the battery is effectively just self-discharging into itself so quickly that it heats up, it starts melting the plastic and starts smoking. When you move to lithium iron phosphate, you've dramatically reduced a lot of the fundamental chemistries that lead to those issues. That's why for the number of batteries installed for stationary versus mobile uses, you just don't see the frequency of incidences here. And these facilities are also monitored 24/7. Actually, every single battery rack and battery module has its own temperature gauge, and you can shut it off, which you can't really do when you're in a car. You don't want to be driving on the freeway and your car just shuts off because it thinks the battery's gotten too hot. So these are sort of, integrated. On this particular project I'm showing the picture of, there's 130,000 of these battery modules that you see, and there's just rows and rows of containers. But that's for a 100 megawatt project. So what do these batteries do in the electric power system? So just to take a step back, you're obviously all aware you're in the Southwest Power Pool. They really have two missions. The first is to keep the lights on, which is about reliability. And then they also operate a market, which ensures they're dispatching generation to serve load at least cost. And it's a phenomenal operation they run. I mean, 72,000 miles of transmission lines are serving 19 million people through all kinds of weather conditions. In SPP's control center looks like a NASA, control center that we're sending rockets into space. All of these men and women work 24 hours a day, keeping the lights on, and they're really dealing with constant threats. A coal plant trips off, suddenly more wind shows up, than forecasted, and the wind farms are cranking. Chinese cyber attacks, a tornado knocks out a transmission line. Generally, it's easy to forecast until those, threats come onto the grid, and it gets very difficult, as SPP experienced in the winter. So what batteries are really doing is providing these men and women working here and operating the system a very responsive and dispatchable resource. Now, granted, it's only for short durations, but generally speaking, recovering from a tornado knocking out a large transmission line, a coal plant tripping off, those are issues that are usually managed often as quickly as within 5 minutes. And all of the battery installations are responding to signals as quickly as 250 milliseconds. So a quarter of a second, it's already moving in very good unison because it's power electronics as opposed to the governor on a rotating thermal generator. And so we get really good responsive capabilities. And that's what we see in ERCOT. The lesson of all the batteries that are operational in ERCOT is they're used at sort of all these pinch moments. They had a near pinch moment in September of this year where the frequency dipped below NERC standards. And they called on all of the batteries to quickly recover the frequency. And then as soon as the batteries had helped recover the frequency and the slower moving generation had been able to also ramp up, then the batteries were called back off. And the rest of the thermal and even some of the renewables continued their diligence of putting out power and serving the community. So energy storage is really a reliability resource from the SPP market. It's not really something that's in the renewables camp. It's not really in the thermal camp. It's really a reliability resource that's supposed to make all of the resources, including the transmission system, function better. And it does it really with 4 key components. The first is ancillary services. It provides voltage control, so that's very quick response to keep all of the voltages within the limits that they're supposed to be for each transmission element. Regulation is the second by second management of the power system, and that's to keep us at 60 hertz. And the 60 hertz is sort of a measure that the amount of generation and the amount of load are equal to one another. And when those get out of whack, then the frequency gets out of whack, and all the battery storage systems respond immediately to frequency deviations without any human intervention. And then operating reserves are more akin to the reserves that SPP acquires in the day-ahead market to ensure that, well, okay, we plan to have these 3 coal plants, these 4 wind farms, these 6 gas plants serving, 28 gigawatts of load tomorrow. Now, if any one of those drops off, what do I call on next? And those are operating reserves. Traditionally, gas plants, some hydro plants, and now batteries, the 3 of those tend to be the most dispatchable resources that serve the operating reserve category, and the market separately procures volumes of those as needed. So that's the primary both purpose of batteries in integrated markets like SPP. It's also the primary revenue source for batteries. Batteries tend to do these services very cost effectively because you don't need to burn any fuel. The fuel is the cheap wind power that you charged up the night before, oftentimes even at negative pricing, which means you're being paid to charge up. And so it's a very cost-effective resource for short duration, operating reserve regulation, and voltage control requirements. The second one is we can supply energy at peak demand. That's exactly the profile you see of our operating batteries in ERCOT. ERCOT calls on us to deliver energy usually at the evening peak, often 6 or 7 p.m., depending on the time of the year, to get through the time when everybody's turned on their microwaves at home and turned on their television. The third one is this management of oversupply of renewables. So if you took a very fast responding diesel generator set and a battery, they both can do the generator side fairly similarly. They can both turn on quickly, they can both serve power, but one of them can soak up all the extra energy. And so since SPP, the majority of its energy on an annual basis comes from wind, then coal, then gas, and wind and coal can switch year to year, and gas is increasingly taking more and more market share, and coal is increasingly declining. But on average, it's wind. But the wind blows best in SPP, and this is from all the work I had done for years in Oklahoma and Texas. It blows mostly in the middle of the night. That's not when Kansas City metro area needs power. And so you basically have the prices collapse on the grid, telling these units to shut off and feather the wind turbines. But that sort of wastes that free energy that the system could be taking on. So if you add storage, we're better able to use the wind fleet that's been built. And as California experienced, which is a solar dominant system, batteries will also manage and help soak up the extra solar. And then deliver that energy at cheaper costs to when people actually need it in the evenings. The fourth thing that batteries can do in SPP is they can provide accredited capacity. This is a hot topic in SPP working groups at the moment of how many megawatts and for how much duration does a battery need to have to be able to serve a resource adequacy requirement. And then briefly, as it relates to IPL, this slide is actually just a cutout from an SPP report where every load responsible entity or utility must supply to SPP what their resource mix looks like to say that they're going to make it through the summer. So this is how IPL represented to SPP, they would make it through the summer last year. And starting kind of in the chart on the right, IPL estimated we need 275 megawatts is going to be our peak demand. And then they had resources allocated of 319 megawatts to serve those 275 megawatts. And that left them with a margin above the demand expected of 15.9%. And they have to maintain a statutory requirement of 15%. And the resource mix was, gas, then coal, then petroleum, then other, then wind. And other is primarily contracts with third-party resources. But batteries can fill this top category. The number is an active discussion with SPP based on the duration, whether they need to be 4, 6, or 8 hours. And the duration requirements will grow over time as expected, but the cost of batteries are going down over time. So there's a nice future projection for batteries serving some of the capacity needs, particularly on peak, the best 4 hours of the summer and of day, or the best 4 hours of a winter storm. I'll also stay on this slide for a moment to mention that this Blue Valley project, which I'll show a map of and talk about in detail, does not require any contractual engagement with Independence Power and Light. IPL and the city do not need to pay a single cent to the battery. The battery really operates in the market and gets all of its revenue from providing these first three services to the entire system, to the entire SPP system. And then when we're dispatched in the market and paid for it, it's because the battery was selected to be the least cost economic resource to serve that particular service, whether it was regulation or providing peak energy, et cetera. And whether it's in the interest of IPL to ever do a capacity contract with the battery is a completely different discussion and irrelevant to whether the battery will be built or not. That's definitely just an IPL decision at some point. And again, like I said, it's not needed. We selected the location in IPL and Independence for a variety of reasons that I'll discuss in a second. But it wasn't to be contracted with IPL per se. It was really to serve the system. So on that point about why put a battery over in the Kansas metro area, so this map has a few things. All the purple colored lines are transmission lines. All of the green blobs are wind farms. Kansas City is over there on the right. The red triangles are gas plants, and the brown triangles are coal plants. And if I take that example of a battery's charging from excess wind energy at night, you could put a battery out in Hutchinson, Kansas, and it would soak up all that wind energy. But then in the next day, if you have a tornado on a hot summer day, you have some thermal convective thunderstorms, takes out one of those big 345 kV purple lines that's going from Hutchinson to Kansas City, I suddenly can't get the energy I stored up last night to the metro area where the majority of electricity is consumed. So if I actually put the battery in Kansas City or on the east side of Kansas City, like we do in Independence, it actually means that we can soak up all this extra wind energy all night from any of these transmission lines, even potentially from a coal plant that wants to run at a higher operational level because that's a better fuel point for it to be at, to have a better heat rate efficiency. We can soak up all that extra energy. And then regardless of the condition of the transmission system the next day, when we discharge that energy to serve businesses and residences, it's going right into the load pocket. And so that's the reliability benefit of locating batteries in cities or near cities, as opposed to out in the Western Kansas area where all the wind is. So also zooming in on why we selected the Blue Valley plant. So this is the retired Blue Valley coal plant and the Blue Valley substation. It runs at 161 kilovolts. We also look for places that are not near schools, not near residences. They fit in the community and fit in the sort of business park character of the area.
We are going to.
So we ended up, we have the rights to purchase the green box. That's where the batteries will ultimately end up. That's adjacent to the IPL property. And we'll interconnect with a red line into the IPL substation. And so what are those construction plans? So SPP, IPL, and Eolian are all parties to the generator interconnection agreement for the 50 megawatt project that's proposed here. We're about finalized with that. I think IPL has a red line to fill in some technical details and schedule on the project. Once that's executed, likely next month, that sort of sets the schedule for the project. That allows us to do all of the detailed engineering on the project. That's typical of any power plant. Once the detailed engineering is done, that allows us to go in front of the city and ensure that we're getting the permitting review and approval that's required to build this facility. That's where a lot of things come in, like stormwater management, setbacks, walls and landscaping and safety protocol, working with the fire marshal, et cetera. And this is, almost the disappointing part. The earliest start of construction is likely 2027, with the commercial operation start date of 2028. And we put the interconnection request in May of 2018. So why does it take 10 years to go from, envisioning a project to having it operational? A lot of that has to do with the interconnection study process in SPP. And even once we have the agreement in place, there's incredible lead times for high voltage equipment that's affecting anybody who wants to build anything, any type of power plant, even a new transmission line, data centers, et cetera. High voltage breakers, main power transformers all have anywhere from at best 18 months, but often 3 years of lead time before they're manufactured, whether it's in the US or Europe or Mexico, and then shipped or delivered via rail to the site. And so we're just sort of in a backlog of, commodities, inflation, and lead times and tight manufacturing, affecting, broadly speaking, the entire industry. So yeah, we're looking forward to getting started. We'll work with IPL and SPP to see if we could bring in the schedule, but it does mean that an idea generated in 2018, in order for us to actually make this clean energy infrastructure investment in the community, which leads to tax base and increases reliability of electric system, it won't come to fruition until 2028. And that's just the character of this industry. Infrastructure is just very hard to build. Water infrastructure is hard to build, and power infrastructure is very hard to build. So I'll sort of pause there with questions. I apologize for speaking quick. I wanted to respect that we would get to about 8 o'clock on this, but that's sort of where we are with the Blue Valley project that we're envisioning here.
Eric, this is Brent. Can you review what the things that you need from the city at this point?
Yeah, great question. So at this point in time, we don't need anything from the city. We've had conversations with economic development, and I believe my team has spoken once with this city development staff of just what sort of requirements do we need to go in to have a project like this approved. We're sort of trying to not put the cart in front of the horse. And until we have this generator interconnection agreement, which does a couple of things, it locks in some technical details and it locks in the schedule for the project, do we feel it's appropriate to take city staff time and say, here's a plan. We think we're following, the code and the standards that you would want for a facility like this to be built in your city, and then get all that input. And it tends to be, we at least approach it as a dialogue with the city to ensure, we're meeting codes. For the most part, there's almost no municipality or city who a couple of years ago even had standards or codes they wanted applied to batteries because it's a new technology. So a lot of times they would take, well, if we were to have a data center built here, because this one's kind of like a data center, it's something that uses power but also gives it back, what would we want? What would be the requirements? Safety requirements, we fall under standard stormwater requirements. What do we want the view of the project to look like from the public road? How big of a wall, how short of a wall sometimes cities want, what vegetation is there. We work extensively with the fire marshal. Every fire department likes to be able to respond to, and this is true for any power plant, has a fire risk. They want to be able to know what the protocols are. When they show up to the gate, can they already see like, oh, there's an issue at this part of the project, or there's a smoke alarm over here, et cetera. So we work extensively with the fire department to ensure that they have the response capabilities they need to address it should we have an incident. And we've never had an incident with any of our projects, but we've usually consult with fire marshals for anywhere from 3 months to 6 months before they're comfortable with approving the project. And then we follow all of the rules and regulations of the city. So no asks of the city other than to just receive us when we're ready to show plans and begin the dialogue to make sure the project meets all the codes and intentions of the city.
Question in chat was, does Independence Power and Light get any revenue from this project, either for use of the transmission line and or the siting of the batteries?
Yeah, good question. So IPL, unless we were to contract with IPL, incurs no revenue or costs from the project. So under the interconnection agreement, we actually fund whatever it costs IPL to build the substation, the point of interconnection for the project. And so, yeah, there's an agreement and sort of controlled by SVP and the flow of funds. But yeah, the existence of the project should cost IPL no money. And even they should be booking staff time for any of the project management and the construction of it to the interconnection agreement. And then we fully fund that. And then all the revenues from the battery come from being dispatched by the SPP market. And that's kind of the key point of the batteries is we compete in the market with all resources of all technologies, and SPP selects whatever is least cost, and the least cost resource is the one that gets the revenue.
Is there a land lease for siting the farm?
Good question. So that parcel, back up a little bit in the green, that's privately owned, and we're under contract to purchase it from the owner. So the project will own the underlying purchase. So from the city's perspective, we will be funding property taxes, and then there's also personal property taxes on the character of the battery itself.
Sorry to keep bombarding you with questions, but what is the estimated investment of this project, approximate, understanding that it's several years out?
Yeah, great question. I'm not trying to be coy, but the project's cost varies dramatically with the price of lithium. So lithium went up almost 5x in late 21 into 22. It has since dropped back to those levels. And short-term forecasts show that because electric vehicle sales have declined or are lower than forecasted, that lithium is actually likely to fall even further. Because of that, it means that the cost of one of these facilities, which range in the tens of millions, especially for a 50 megawatt project, varies up to an order of magnitude of tens of millions based on the lithium price, because that's really the core commodity that goes into these projects. So again, not to be coy, once we are really close to ordering equipment and our prices do get locked in, we'll end up having a conversation with the city when it comes to figuring out the appropriate tax rate of what was the cost of our project. That's often, we've had cities either do it as a revenue base or often just as a cost approach for how the personal property is taxed. So that will be disclosed when the numbers are actually finalized based on the purchase of equipment at the time.
Does the site allow you to expand?
Yeah, good question. So the acreage here would allow us to expand, and we do have a second 50 megawatt interconnection request. It's later in the SPP study process, so it's several years from getting through viability and studies. So ultimately, you could have a 100 megawatt project here, which would be on the order of what the coal plant was originally in terms of megawatts. Yeah, and at that point, it'd be a 100 megawatt reliability resource, nestled inside IPL's load pocket of about 275 megawatts. So again, it's SPP that would dispatch us, but it certainly, likely improves the reliability outcomes for Independence.